Welcome back, dear friends. After learning the parts of the flower, it's time for us to see how a flower changes into a fruit. And the first step in that is pollination. So, wondering what is pollination? So, here we go to learn what is pollination.
So let us begin by drawing a quick and easy diagram of a flower. So we have the stalk here, pedicel, the thalamus, the green part, sepal, and the colored part, petal. Right? And then comes the male part of the flower, the tip of it, anther, and the stalk of it, filament. So we'll draw two of them. The anther and the filament together we call it stamen. And then in the center we have the female part, which is the pistil, the female part of it, pistil. Inside the pistil we have the ovules, which contains the female gamete, right? And here this flower, it is a bisexual flower. It is a bisexual flower as it contains the male part, that is stamen, and the female part, that is your pistil. It's a bisexual flower. Now here we should know that the stamen, the tip of the stamen, that is your anther, is producing pollen grains, right? It produces a large amount of pollen grains, right? This pollen, singular pollen grain, one pollen grain, it's something, it's like this, and this contains the male gamete. The pollen grain or the pollen contains the male gamete. And for the process of fruit formation, the male gamete should reach the female gamete inside the ovule. And for that, the pollen should get transferred to the stigma. The pollen from the anther gets transferred to the stigma of a flower, and that process is known as pollination. That process is pollination, which means the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of a flower. It is pollination. Now you can see here a type of pollination wherein the pollen grains is getting transferred to the stigma of the same flower. So we call this type of pollination as self-pollination, which happens within the same flower. Now there is another condition here. We can see two different flowers, that is the male and the female flowers, right? These flowers are known as unisexual flowers. Now in this case, self-pollination cannot take place as these flowers contains only one reproductive part, either male or female, either stamen or pistil. So here what happens, the pollen which is produced from the male flower gets transferred to the stigma of the female flower. That is, from one flower to the other flower. The pollen is getting transferred from one flower to the other flower, and this is known as cross pollination. We call it cross pollination, right? And this cross pollination takes place both in unisexual as well as in bisexual flower. Even in this flower, there are chances of this pollen to get transferred to the other flower. So cross pollination takes place both in bisexual as well as unisexual flowers, whereas self pollination takes place only in a bisexual flower, whereas in this case, in unisexual flower, self pollination is not possible. As such, in unisexual flowers, only cross pollination can take place. So here we have done with this pollination process, transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of a flower. If it happens in the same flower, it is self-pollination. If the transfer of pollen takes place from one flower to another flower of same species, we call it cross-pollination. So once your pollen lands here, what happens to the pollen? That we are going to learn in our next class. So thank you so much for watching this video on pollination. See you all soon with the next video. Thank you so much.